Hello everyone, welcome to another book review Wednesday, and today I am going to be addressing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kessley. Now this is actually a book that is based on the famous film, which I did a review of a while back. If you look through my video library, it should be there. Yeah, this is basically the book that is based upon, or that the movie used to base itself upon. And yeah, we're going to be kind of discussing a little bit of what the book entails, which is actually rather interesting and brings up, I think, a lot of similar things that the film does, although I think there are some stark differences, I think, plot-wise. But basically, despite the little differences that exist within the plot, it's pretty much the same as far as characters are concerned, and it kind of brings out a lot of interesting commentary onto things. So basically, the interesting thing too that I think you get through the book's perspective is the fact that it is told through a patient and one of the main sort of side characters of the story, which is Chief Bromden. Basically, not only is the narrator, but provides a very interesting look into the whole establishment that kind of exists within a psychiatric ward, which is where this story takes place in. And ultimately how there's kind of this sort of power structure, and how ultimately there's sort of a rebellion against that. And basically, this all sort of starts when a new patient visits the ward, basically to ultimately stay there, named Randall McMurphy. And as a result of him being there, he's kind of the most outlandish, crazy guy out of the bunch. And being that kind of rebellious dude that he is, he kind of goes against the established order. And the established order is really the people that are sort of running the insane asylum. In particular, Nurse Ratched, who is rather authoritarian in the way she dictates certain things. I would say I think she is, she's probably maybe on the same level as she is within the film, although I would say that the book kind of explains a little bit more as far as really her motivations, I feel, rather than the film. So that's, I think, something that's also very important to note. And I guess that you could say that kind of makes her a little bit more sinister. But basically, as a result of Randall McMurphy sort of standing up, this causes a lot of problems, and eventually things start to get chaotic, and ultimately things end up not going as what you would expect, which is I think something that this film, that this book in particular does really well of. It doesn't really try to lay out the plot for you in a sort of 3-act format. It so much kind of just takes you through the events of the story. And yes, there's sort of a climactic experience and event that takes place within the story, but it's kind of tries to not be so plot focused as much as the characters and how they play a role into moving kind of the plot along, and not really about characters getting from point A to point B, or X, Y, and Z and whatnot. It's just really, it just kind of flows more as a story. Um, and as you can tell probably by the way I'm explaining the story, it's largely has to do with rebellion, power, and freedom. You can really tell that the patients of the psychiatric ward are not really given a huge amount of rights or freedoms to kind of really do what they want and kind of feel, I guess you could say, normal. Um, and they're kind of put on over, uh, they're put under this very, uh, I guess you could say, um, authoritarian lens where the people within the ward are kind of not necessarily spying on them, but really uh, ultimately being with them constantly and really being in charge of them. So you you do feel the sense that they do kind of lack this kind of a freedom. And then when McMurphy's character comes, they feel kind of, I guess you could say, liberated in a way. And they feel like they have some kind of power and control over their lives. And this ultimately ends up resulting in rebellion because they end up getting mad at the establishment and whatnot. Now, I think the interesting thing about the story too is although it is complex in the way that it tries to explain things and rationalize things and uh, establish things through the characters, um, there's a very kind of black and white sort of perspective. Like, you can tell that Nurse Ratchet's supposed to be the evil one that you hate, and that McMurphy is some kind of god and hero. Um, and I almost felt like that perspective was a little bit too extreme because I felt like sometimes the way Randall would behave wasn't, it's not something that he doesn't have the personality of some, kind of average guy. He's kind of very outlandish and um, he just doesn't he just doesn't really seem to fit with with I think other people all that well, even though he gets along with people well. Once you start telling him what to do, or once, you put him within some kind of society, where there is kind of some power structure, he goes completely ballistic and can't handle it and rebels. And I think, there are some times where I felt like he was being a little bit too um, out there and wild and chaotic to the point where, it it wasn't really, I think, helping the patients really. I mean, on the one hand, it was helping, but I don't think it was really necessarily helping so much in the right way. So I think really what McMurphy's character as well as Miss Ratchet's character is sort of, they represent two extremes. McMurphy's the extreme anti-society, kind of create a ruckus, don't really accomplish anything or do anything, kind of guy who just gambles away all his money. And then you have Miss Ratchet, who's very, conservative and very uppity and very controlling and manipulative and whatnot. So you really do have these two kinds of extremes kind of going on here. And I think it results in me feeling that the whole concept of the story, I think, is a little bit unbalanced in that sense. Um, I think through film, it almost works better on a visual level. The fact that we do have this great force of a villain that we see within Ratchet's character, and then sort of the funny goof McMurphy, sort of trying to rebel against her. I think it just comes off as more entertaining to see it in that perspective. Whereas within a book, I feel like that there should be a little bit more of a complexity here and not just labeling one side as the complete, means of salvation and really what ultimate freedom means, and then you have this uppity conservative woman who wants to control and manipulate and abuse things. I really feel like it's really representing two extremes. So I think really that's ultimately what I think resulted in me kind of being not necessarily not invested, but not really feeling like the story was as complex as it made it out to be, or as in depth. Like I really did feel like it was trying to paint a very fairly black and white picture. And I have nothing wrong with books that do this, but for me, at least in this case, I felt like that there were just two extremes kind of going on. And as a result, I didn't feel really one strong way to really any of the characters personally, except the narrator. I think this was actually a brilliant choice to have the uh, Chief Bromden be the narrator, because he is sort of the outsider in that he's just looking into the 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 area that he's surrounded by and seeing all these people interact with one another. And although, again, through his perspective, it's a fairly black and white picture, I still felt that he wasn't as outlandish, as extreme of a person. Um, and I think that kind of makes him somewhat, I guess you could say, identifiable, and where the audience could maybe insert themselves as being. So again, it's really all how you choose to kind of perceive it. I mean, I did feel like giving it a little bit more shades of gray would have made it a little bit more interesting, to say the least, and I think it would have added a lot more depth. But I understand the kind of approach he's trying to take, and I understand that he's trying to bring up all these different things that sort of exist within society, and how sometimes that can be a problem. And yes, I understand that. That's perfectly clear. Uh, but at the same time, I think for me personally, I would have definitely liked more shades of gray, um, more or less siding with one particular, or I felt like, again, the book was trying to have a side with one particular extreme, rather than kind of trying to balance out the two, and understanding that it's important to have society and hierarchy, but it's also important to have freedom and to have a say and to be able to feel like you're in a comfortable environment. So I think that's ultimately all I can say when it comes to this particular story. Um, However, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. And if you are interested, I definitely would recommend this story, especially if you liked the movie. You will probably enjoy the book as much. But that's all for now, folks. Bye bye.